morning to my very special guest, Sarah Spinks.
Good morning, Jo. It's lovely.
Thank you. Morning. So I'm just going to do a little bit of an introduction so that people know who you are, if that's okay. So Sarah was diagnosed with breast cancer nearly 7 years ago at the age of 47 years old. And at the time working in international corporate marketing research, she dove deep into the evidence for using integrative medicine to support health and outcomes and used her own diagnosis as a catalyst for personal growth and for change. Passionate about helping others to find their center and their sense of self through the shock, overwhelm and fear, she followed her heart to retrain as a health coach and has been working for 5 years now as a certified holistic and functional medicine health coach. Sarah also looks after the cancer support group for the integrative cancer charity Yes to Life. So a huge welcome, Sarah, and thank you for coming on this podcast today. The first thing that I start all of my podcasts off with is asking my guests, what 3 things do you do on a regular basis to look after your own self-care, your own health and well-being?
Perfect, Jo. Thank you. And thank you again for having me. This is one of my favorite questions because obviously this is key to how I help people as well. When we look at health holistically and body, mind and soul, it's almost like I want something in my everyday that ticks boxes for everything. Because when we're looking at things holistically, everything has sort of a multifaceted benefit. So in terms of the 3 things I do, I actually have a mantra, which is something I work on daily with myself and again with clients, which is I wake up and I think, how am I going to nourish, nurture, and be today? And it's those 3 things. Now, how I approach those things can vary. So nourish is obviously how I fuel my body, how I nourish it, how I bring in nutrition and hydration. The way that I nurture myself, I think that is through, physical movement, but also through inspiration and uplift and joy. But how do I nurture that? And something that ticks all of those boxes for me, for example, is a beautiful walk in nature. And then how do I be? Each day I want to check in on my energy state and listen to my needs and how I am. And then I can bring in other things as well. But also that being part, which is not doing, is stillness, and whether that's sleep. So sleep prioritization is probably top of the list. And if I'm getting less sleep, menopausal woman, or stress can disrupt that, then the being part is meditation or deep rest. So I would suggest it was, again, nourish, nurture, be, each and every single day, and keeping it very simple.
Yeah, and those are amazing mantras to start the day with, because so often, particularly in this day and age, we don't listen to ourselves. We have the noise, or we choose to seek asking others rather than feeling into ourselves. So thank you so much for sharing those, because I think that there's something there for all of us to take note of and to practice that listening to our inner wisdom, our inner intuition, and be guided by that. So thank you for that.
You're welcome. It's absolutely, and I think we can trip over ourselves sometimes because, we can't, I can't do the same every day.
Yes.
So it's almost how to listen into the energy state and do things in accordance with that, but while also trying to lift our energy state. And I think that's where we can get tripped up a little bit.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
So, Sarah, my first question to you is, what did you used to do and how was that for you?
Yeah. It's interesting. It's quite a shift. So, I grew up in the 80s. I'd watched Melanie Griffiths in Working Girl, and I wanted to be a businesswoman. I wanted to be, independent, self-sufficient. So At uni, I did business with IT. It was a new thing at the time. The internet wasn't telling my age. But my first job was actually with British Airways, supporting with tech. But actually, I was involved in the advent of British Airways Environment Department and setting up schemes around the airways and on flight. So that was really interesting. I only did that for a couple of years, sort of while at uni and moving forward. But then I wanted to be a chartered accountant, so I started that training. I sort of eventually wanted to become a management consultant to deal with different problems. I knew very much from the start I didn't want to do the same every day. But actually, when I was training to be a chartered accountant, it was the recession as well in the country, and it was all a bit more doom and gloom. And I actually experienced what I think, it was never diagnosed, but depression for the first time. Felt very, very low, very dispirited. Didn't realize what that was at the time. But I actually quite quickly made the decision to leave chartered accountancy and move to Paris. And I applied for a job in Paris and drove to the interview and got the job. And immediately my energy lifted and I felt like a completely different human being. And I think I didn't probably realize it consciously at the time, but that was the first indication that if something's not right, I had the power to change it. Obviously, then things were a lot more flexible with less responsibility, but that made a big difference to me. But I think over the years, I moved back to London and then nearer home in my career. And it was very much famine and feast in terms of my energy. And I had chronic illness from a child, eczema, chronic issues, sort of losing time during my A levels due to things that were never diagnosed. So I had to be fairly proactive. And I think the stress, even though there was a buzz about the work, probably influenced how I was feeling and dealing with my life.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. So in 2018, you were diagnosed with breast cancer. Can you share to our listeners what this felt like for you and what did you do when you received that news?
Yeah, I knew something wasn't right. I'd been to the GP 4 to 5 times the year before. Everything was normal. I didn't question it, although I did obviously keep going back. I was having time off work and something wasn't right. But when I was diagnosed with breast cancer, of course, that's still a complete shock. Ironically, the symptoms that I went in to get explored weren't the breast cancer. It was almost found by accident. That's kind of how it was termed, although it wasn't, because I was there and had a mammogram. So I think it was shock. One thing that surprised me was the immediate profound grief, facing my own mortality. I remember sort of being doubled up in that despair. I couldn't have my picture taken, or when I did, I felt that it was temporary. It's almost like my picture was being taken because I wasn't going to be there. I had 2 young children, 9 and 13 at the time. My mum wasn't well, so couldn't even process the news. So there was so much going on for me. But within that, and this is strange to say, there was a shred of light, a shred of hope. I think it made me look at my life as a whole. And what it did do was give me permission to review it. I was certainly one of those that I see in many women, which is I feel guilty if I think about myself, putting work and all our responsibilities first. So cancer gave me permission to put myself first. And I'm a very curious person. So the first question I asked was, what can I do to support myself? And I was told nothing. I was told not to change my diet, even though I wasn't asked what my diet was. I was told not to look online, and I can understand that. But I was also told not to look in other countries at what they were doing. And actually in the UK, we're a little bit down the list in terms of our cancer care. So that was a bit like a red rag to a bull. So I started doing my research. I was a researcher and quickly came across integrative medicine and some great resources and literature. Yes to Life charity being one of those that just blew my mind in terms of a whole new approach to health. I met Dr. Rosie Daniel, who I then trained with, and she was my integrative doctor, and it just took me to a whole new place. I then wanted to find all the pieces of my puzzle and put them together, understand my biochemistry and my mind, body, spirit health. So I trained in functional medicine coaching as well. So that was kind of my journey from that, and to feel that spark and that light and that hope at a time where I'd never experienced such profound despair and grief was just magical. And I thought, I'm going to have some of this, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Sarah, for sharing that. I think it's really important. You know, so many people who have been diagnosed with cancer will know that despair. They will know that fear. And so to share your journey of how you navigated that in the beginning, I'm sure will give others hope to explore too. So thank you for that. So can you please, for those who are listening, share with them health coaching? What does it entail? How does it support people? What do you do? Because a lot of people may not know.
I think it's really misunderstood. And I, for one, was very cynical about it to start with. I know Dr. Rosie wanted me to join sort of her mentoring and coaching program. And I was like, no, my funds were very limited. I wanted to spend the money on supplements, doctors, and getting answers. So still very passive in the way that I was approaching my health. Historically, I'd worked with natural doctors and passively sort of listened to what they said and took one supplement or another. But what I didn't realize, and when I was training and going through the health coaching, was how that switched it. It switched it to a very proactive approach. It put me at the center. I don't think I'd ever been asked properly how I was. You know, we ask each other, you know, how are you? Like, we're fine. And, you know, we skirt around the edges, or, you know, somebody might get full barrel of despair that we might be feeling at the time. But that kind of, how am I really? But not just how am I surface level, how am I in my mind, how am I in my body, and how am I in my spirit? I'd shut down my spiritual health from the age of about 18, thinking that was for kids and not part of who I was. So when I was asked at diagnosis by a loved one, what would you do for free and what do you love? I had no idea. I just ticked along for so many years. So health coaching was probably the first experience where I gave myself time to reflect and to dive deep into, you know, that empowering space of feeling seen and heard. And I think what it did mostly was supported my connection with myself and my creation of my, not creation, but noticing my own inner wisdom and cultivating that. So health coaching is conversation. You know, I love the expression, if we don't ask the right questions, we don't get the right answers. I think it can be quite uncomfortable to have that reflected back and to look more deeply under the surface. Health coaching can be supported by a number of tools and resources to really sort of peel back the layers of the onion, I like to think about it, and unfold who we are. I like to think of it as blossoming, where we're coming back to center, learning to read our emotions, to read our feelings, because we very much say, for example, like, I'm anxious or I have anxiety. But what does that mean? For me, now I understand it's a symptom that I need to hear and listen to something else deeper within me. So health coaching really put me in touch with that. And the beauty of health coaching is that it helped me create what I like to think of as a self-care manual. So if you bought me in a shop, I'd come with this manual. It's how I work, how I tick, what makes me sick. And that has the answers in it. So however I feel on any day, I pretty much can tap into that resource, like my health toolkit, to, you know, resource myself. And of course, that comes with external support as well. So health coaching is not an either or with conventional or other modalities. Health coaching, I feel, should be at the center for everybody if we haven't got that connection, because it teaches us how to do it. And then we can make our decisions from a place that isn't fear. We can make our decisions from a place of empowerment, from listening into how we resonate with other medical teams and practitioners to help us. So it really is, for me, what personalized medicine and patient-centered care is all about.
Yes, yeah, definitely. And just hearing you speak now, the key points that I take from what you do with your health coaching is you take time to listen. You take time and this is going to sound really silly, but I know a lot of people perhaps will resonate with it. You take the time to hear.
Yeah, I
You,
think that's it. Yeah, it's listening. It's called active listening.
yeah,
We also use sort of motivational interviewing and understanding our own strengths and our values, what
yes,
trips us up, what our obstacles are, what we may need to break through to really get to the light, to get to
yeah.
those answers.
And also, what I hear is that it's about you exploring your client's self. You know, it so often, like you've mentioned before, particularly, please don't think that I'm dissing gentlemen, because I'm not. But so often as a woman, we become a role. We become a business person, we become a mother, we become a carer, we become a wife, we become a cleaner, we become a doer. But we then neglect the self. And so when it comes to looking and exploring inwardly, that is an uncomfortable place to hang out. But what I'm really hearing from you is that by the coaching, it's always bringing people back to the self, you know, that self inner wisdom, that self knowing, that self intuition of listening to what the I needs at that moment. Am I right in thinking that?
Absolutely, absolutely that. The first step in my sort of simple 4-step framework is to create deeper awareness. It's
Yes,
noticing. If we don't notice, we can't do anything
yes,
about it. And I'd probably say that every single person I've ever worked with has used some form of, it's bringing me home to myself, or I'm coming home to myself.
yes.
And once that happens, that has a very healing
Yeah.
effect. And I cannot to this day understand how we can live so much of our lives without that. I still feel that every day sometimes. I'm like, that's just incredible. I do believe it happens for us at the time it's supposed to, but it's very strange to have existed 47 years, or certainly my more adult years, without that connection.
Yes. And I really feel that with you, and know that place too from my own journey. And it's taking that time to reflect, to pause, to listen within. You know, what do we need to tap into for our own health and well-being, and to quieten down the volume of the noise surrounding us. And one of the analogies that I used a lot when working with some other groups of people was, if you don't keep your candle lit and shining bright, how on earth can you light other people's candles from your own? And for me, health coaching is that gift of being able to keep your own candle lit first, before then giving your light to others, your energy to others.
Yeah, totally. I think we live with a series of masks, don't we, in our closets, and we're like, which one shall I put on today?
Yeah.
Take a lot of courage to take them off and be with another person, be with the health coach. Because I think, we're our own harshest critics. We
Yes.
live in a sea of judgment, whether that's our own, whether it's perception from others, whether it's others directly. And I think people then expect to be judged in a health coaching situation, and that's not the case. And I think that's the key surprise when people come into it. It's like I can take off all of my masks and be exactly who I am. And
Yeah.
there's no judgment. And then that unfolds something quite powerful.
Yeah. And that's when the healing
Yeah,
truly begins, isn't it?
yeah, yeah. And it can happen so quickly just with that permission.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you for sharing that. So, one of the things that I find a lot with clients is that they know that they need to address the physical.
Mm.
They know that they need to do something medically, and they explore the therapies, the practices that they seek to help them with the physical aspect of their being. Um, But also what I experience, and I'm just curious as to whether you see this too, is what do we do with emotions? What do we do? What do your clients do with emotions? Because the physical we can do. We can look at the nutrition, we can look at the supplementation, we can look at movement or meditation. What do we do with these emotions that get locked in the cells, in the tissue, in that muscle memory? What do we do?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's the $1 million question I hear both through the charity when people are on an integrative approach and they've, like you say, changed the things that they can control, the lower hanging fruit. May that be diet, may that be more movement, detoxification, prioritizing sleep. But if we are noticing more, when we create that awareness, we start to feel. A lot of the people I start to work with say, I don't know what my emotions feel like. We use the term disconnected, but of course people aren't even aware of that term to start with. And it's like, I just don't know what signals my body is giving me. And then you start to uncover that and then start giving names to emotions. And then the fear can come in again, or not again, because it's there typically. I think one of the hardest things we learn when we're learning about health is the impact of stress that it has on our immune system. And therefore, because typically we're all experiencing stress, that can be even more stressful. And of course, that's the top emotion. But the stress of feeling emotion, or then understanding how childhood, how life experience has created emotions that can be trapped in the body, the fear of not finding a release for that, I think, can be quite overwhelming and can create a lot of fear. I hear, I haven't processed my emotions, and I've said that to myself, although I tend to wear mine on my sleeve a little bit, and it doesn't take many yoga poses for me to start crying or, releasing it in the body. And I think it's being talked about a lot more. It's a subject, somatic therapies are having a resurgence in the wellness industry, although I'm sure somatic practitioners will say it's not a resurgence, but more and more people I see who are dealing with cancer are talking about emotional processing. And of course, we have modalities. I've used Reiki and trained in Reiki, so I could treat myself. That sort of helps. Um, Emotional freedom technique, acupuncture, and kinesiology. I'm a big fan, and I've worked with you, and I love your approach. What I find incredible about these modalities that help emotional processing is it's not logical. It's not coming from the brain. It's an experience that we have to almost let go and allow it to happen, or it's not even within us. It's going to happen if we given time and space for an emotion to come up and release. It'll do it. And it's almost like just watching it happen. And again, as you become more familiar with that, you just then have to put yourself in the space of enabling that to happen. Of
Yes.
course, there are modalities or things like journaling, which are probably a little more mind oriented, although we try to get out that when we're doing it as well. But
Yeah.
it's certainly something that people are looking to work with. And I think from what I've seen in terms of sort of some prominent integrative doctors and authorities on the subject, it really is going to change the way we are as human beings to understand some of what we're terming negative emotions, may that be anger, fear, guilt, shame, that actually no, it's all just part of it. We should be experiencing them all as human beings. There isn't necessarily a positive and a negative. If we can look at things as they're happening for you rather than to you, and just notice with some detachment of how that feels, it's a much more, again, powerful place to live from.
Yes. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you for sharing that. And I think what I'm really taking from our time together is when anything happens, it's that pause and that moment to reflect on the why.
Yeah.
What do I need to do? What do I need to address? What do I need to change? what's serving me, what's not serving me, what's dispiriting me, which is bringing your energy low, or what is energizing me and raising my energy. But it's taking ourselves to that place of giving ourselves permission, big word, to do that. And that health coaching can help people to explore that some more with guidance and help, and your incredible wisdom in all things to do with integrative health. And that it doesn't have to be an either or. It doesn't have to be a medical route versus an alternative route. That we are exploring more and more and more the fact that there is this integrative process that weaves all into our health and well-being. And I think that you sharing your health coaching to others who may not even be aware that this is available will help them so much moving forward. So,
Sorry.
sorry, no, you go.
Sorry, yes, it is starting to be integrated into the NHS. There's a lot of what I'm a registered health coach with the UK International Health Coaches Association, and they are doing a lot of work to, move this out into a cultural and societal change, and trying to get, health coaches in corporate, in smaller businesses, sort of basically to give access to that to everybody, to put people back at the center of their care, and therefore improving not only preventative medicine, but outcomes from treatment and conventional medicine. Health coaching can support, tolerance of treatment that can be quite harsh. So the phrase I love, Jo, just to sum it up, is an Albert Camus one, which is, in the midst of winter, I found there was within me an invincible summer. And that's just one of my absolute favorites. And I think that's what you're sort of saying too, that it's like there's light and summer within me, however hard it gets out here.
Yeah, absolutely. And, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. And I'm sure some people would like to find out a little bit more. So we'll share your details and the Yes to Life details on the resources page. And the one pivotal thing that I'm going to take away from today is, if somebody asks you how you are, don't just say fine. If you ask somebody how they are and they say fine, then say, how are you really?
Yeah.
Because it's taking the time to be truly with that person and hear them from our heart, and not to ask them just as I'm just going to ask people how they are and they're fine.
Yeah.
So that is pivotal. So Sarah, I would dearly, and you're going to challenge me probably on this one, I would dearly love to invite you back next year, because I know that you do so much more work in this field than people perhaps are aware of yet. And so I would love to invite you back in the new year, and let's delve a little deeper in Sarah Spinks and all that you do and all that you can offer, if I may.
Absolutely, I'd love that. I could talk about this subject all day.
Thank you so much for coming along today. Absolute pleasure to speak with you.
You too, Jo. Lots of love. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.